Hello, I'm Major Mailman, and I'd like to take a few moments to tell you about a very special gift that you have the power to give. It costs nothing, and yet it is priceless. I'm talking about a gift of life through the donation of bone marrow. Each year, an estimated 16,000 U.S. citizens are diagnosed with leukemia, aplastic anemia, or other fatal blood diseases. For many, a cure is possible through a bone marrow transplant. Please take a few moments to watch this important video describing our nationwide campaign. After the program, I'll explain how you can join in this life-saving effort.
On May 25, 1990, Congress passed a law that opened the way for the Department of Defense to become a partner in an ambitious effort to save the lives of thousands of critically ill men, women, and children through bone marrow transplants. I'm Admiral Robert Krasner. Every year, through the National Marrow Donor Program, thousands of military and civilian members of the Department of Defense volunteer to be tested and added to the National Marrow Donor Program's nationwide registry. This congressionally sanctioned registry helps match marrow donors with desperately ill men, women, and children whose only chance to live is a marrow transplant. Even in the brief time this program has been in operation, a number of our Department of Defense volunteers have had the opportunity to experience the remarkable feeling of knowing they helped save a life. I know how wonderful that feeling is firsthand because I was one of those fortunate volunteers. My marrow provided the match that saved the life of a very special little girl. Please watch and learn how you can become a part of this important life-saving effort.
Every day counts, every minute counts, every hour counts.
It's my last chance to save my son, save his life. There's nowhere else to go.
I'm on a clock, and the clock is ticking. And if I don't find a match in 2 or 3 years, I'll go into the next phase of my disease, and I'll basically die within 6 months.
I never thought it would be me that I have a child with leukemia, but believe me, in reality, this is true. My son, 9 years old, with leukemia.
Just put yourself in my shoes. You know, if it was your son or your daughter, I'm sure that you would want someone to help you.
Hello, I'm Lou Gossett.
And I'm Sandy Duncan. These people have fatal blood diseases. Up until a few years ago, if all conventional treatments failed to cure them, they would have no chance to survive. But today, thanks to one of the most important medical breakthroughs of this generation, there's not only hope, but a possible cure. It's a bone marrow transplant.
No one understands the importance of this treatment better than Dr. Donald Thomas, the 1990 Nobel Prize winner in medicine for research in the field of marrow transplantation.
The bone marrow is a large organ in our body, and most people aren't really aware of it. It's about the size of the liver, but because it's scattered throughout the body, inside the bones, most of us don't know that we have it. It makes the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the other components of the blood. And if the bone marrow stops functioning because of disease, patients can't live very long. The reason we undertake bone marrow transplants is to cure the disease.
Before the transplant can take place, the patient must find someone whose marrow very closely matches his or her own. The first place to look is to a brother or sister, but 70% of the time, a match is not found in the family member, so the search begins for an unrelated donor.
I want you to meet a boy whose family searched for an unrelated marrow donor. His name is Drew, and when he was about 2, his parents were told he had aplastic anemia.
When Drew was diagnosed, everything stopped for us. Everything else that in your life you thought was important stops. It stops becoming important.
You just can't believe that it's happening, and you just keep saying to yourself that this can't possibly be true.
Immediately, a desperate search began to find a donor who would save Drew's life. Today, Drew is alive because they found a donor. His name is Jeff.
Until actually it happens to you, you can't imagine how good you could feel about saving somebody's life, especially a child. It was his last chance of survival. It really started sinking in what I did. I gave a person another chance to live.
Without the transplant, Drew would have died. And just as sure as Jeff had pulled him out of a burning building, that Marrow saved Drew's life.
Your arms too. With your arms too. Come on.
To help find that life-saving marrow match in Jeff, Drew's parents turned to the National Marrow Donor Program, or NMDP, a congressionally authorized network that recruits and helps match volunteer donors with those who need marrow transplants.
Through NMDP, community-based donor centers, potential donors give a small blood sample to test for characteristics that are used in matching their marrow to the patient's.
The procedure to become a donor is really very simple. Initially, after the decision to become part of the registry is made, a small amount of blood is taken, several tablespoons. That blood is used to establish the tissue type of that donor. That tissue type is then becomes part of our computerized list, and when a patient in need of a bone marrow transplant searches the list, if that donor is then identified as a potential match, the donor is called back to the local donor center. A small amount of blood is again taken for further testing. If they then turn out after the second round of testing to still be the best possible donor for a given patient, we'll have a session with their local donor center where an individual who is well experienced and knowledgeable about bone marrow transplantation will sit down with them, tell them all the details of donating and actually the process itself. And if after hearing that description they feel that they want to proceed, then a physical examination is done, further blood testing is done, and they are then identified as the donor.
The marrow collection is done in a hospital under anesthesia. The marrow is taken from the back of the pelvis through a special needle and syringe. No stitches are necessary, but the donor probably will experience a little soreness at the collection site when he or she comes out of the anesthesia. The donor probably will require blood during or after the procedure, and he or she would have donated his or her own blood before the collection for this purpose. Typically, the donor stays overnight in the hospital and is back to pre-donation activity within 2 or 3 days. The marrow will then be hand-carried to the hospital where the transplant will take place.
Now, here's a challenge. With the current size of the registry, we are only able to find a donor match for less than 30% of those who need one. That's why we need to register and test many more people who are willing to become marrow donors.
There is an especially critical need to register people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds because donors are identified through genetic traits. Matches usually occur between people of the same race. For example, if I, as an African American, were in need of a marrow donor, my chances of finding that match would be greater within my own ethnic group. The same is true of people of other races, such as Asian Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, or Hispanics.
Not only is this important for those who need a transplant right now, but it's important for all of us. The day may come when you or someone you love is diagnosed with one of these potentially fatal diseases and needs a marrow transplant. I'm sure you would want the best chance possible of finding a match. That can only happen if we test thousands of people. If you are between the ages of 18 and 55 and in good health, here is your chance to truly make a difference in this world. It is a matter of life and death.
A question often comes up in our marrow donor recruitment drives. Volunteers want to know if their marrow will be used to benefit military personnel and their dependents. Every year, critical illness forces some 300 military families to search the National Marrow Donor Program for a life-saving marrow match. To date, every one of our active duty military or dependents who have found a compatible match through the registry have received that match from a civilian. Conversely, there are many, many civilian children, mothers and fathers alive today because a Department of Defense volunteer took the time to be tested and cared enough to share his or her marrow to help save that life. So, while this is not specifically a military-to-military program, it is American to American. In fact, because the National Marrow Donor Program works closely with programs in other nations, we're even able to reach out and save lives in other countries. This means that military and other American families in need of a match also have access to these other registries through the National Marrow Donor Program. If you decide to participate today, you will be joining the ranks of thousands of very special military and civilian members who, over the years, have helped to build the Department of Defense's proud tradition of exhibiting, in time of need, the highest degree of selflessness and caring for fellow Americans. And most important, you will be helping to save a life.
Donating bone marrow, for me, I look at it as being one of the luckiest opportunities I've ever had.
Very seldom you're put in a position that you are the only one that can make a difference. And that's the position I was put in, and I felt great about it.
I would urge anyone out there to give bone marrow and be able to give someone a second chance in life also, just like what I did.
Quick needle prick in the arm, about a minute or two, it's all over.
I definitely hope to do it again, because I will be there with bells on.
As you have seen, the need for volunteers is vital, because the more potential donors we have, the better chance there is of finding out one special match. I know this firsthand, because I have been diagnosed with leukemia. My search, along with a young friend of mine at Suffrage, continues as it does for thousands of others. Here's how you can play a major role in increasing the odds by joining the registry of the National Marrow Donor Program. This month, we are having a DoD-sponsored bone marrow drive. This is your opportunity to join the list of those caring people ready and willing to make a difference. Remember, the few minutes you spend giving a small amount of blood can add up to years of healthy living for someone in need. The drive will be held at Suffrage on Sunday, April 23rd in Building 780 from 1200 to 1800 hours, and at TACOM on Monday, April 24th and Tuesday, April 25th in Building 230, Training Room 109C from 0900 to 1500 hours. If you'd like more information, you can contact me at DSN 786-8690 or Mary McClellan at DSN 786-6632 or DSN 786-6875. We are all dedicated to serving our country and defending its citizens. The success we achieve is often reflected in our efforts